So, welcome back to Sodium Haze. This is going to be the first of our daily updates concerning the situation in Ukraine. There's a lot going on today, so let's jump into it. I'm going to start with The Guardian, their live blog, which of course is 90% sourced in favour of and directly from the Ukrainian side in the war. So they're leading with this headline: Ukrainian forces stabilizing the situation in Bakhmut, says General. The top commander of Ukraine's military has said that his forces are pushing back against Russian troops in the long and grinding battle for the town of Bakhmut. British military intelligence also said that Russia appeared to be moving to a defensive strategy in eastern Ukraine. Associated Press reported. There's a quote here: the Bakhmut direction is the most difficult thanks to the titanic efforts of the defense forces. The situation is being stabilized. Excuse me. That's said by General Valery Zaluzhny from the Ukrainian side in a post on Telegram, giving a synopsis of a telephone call with Sir Tony Radakin, Britain's Chief of Defence Staff. So the Ukrainians say that it's difficult in Bakhmut, and thanks to the heroes of the Ukrainian heroes, that the situation is being stabilised. And AP, a wire agency, is reporting that Russia appeared to be moving towards a defensive strategy in eastern Ukraine. The 7-month battle for Bakhmut, where Russian forces have closed in on 3 sides, is the longest clash of the war, with Russia deploying regular soldiers and fighters of the mercenary Wagner group. Let's unpick a few things about that occurred to me. Okay, hard to dispute the fact that it's a long and grinding battle. I think one could question quite how long. It certainly hasn't been a 7-month battle for Bakhmut. It took the Russians and the Wagner mercenaries some time to even approach Bakhmut. So the actual battle for Bakhmut, I would say, is more 2 months. Long enough for an enormous amount of bloodshed on both sides. But 7 months, the reason that they're doing this, the reason that they're saying 7 months, is to make the Russians look bad. Look at that. Look how long it's taken the Russians to take Bakhmut. It hasn't taken the Russians actually all that long to encircle Bakhmut. It took the Russians a long time to attack, bombard, storm with heavy losses on both sides the many fortifications and minefields that have been set up en route to Bakhmut. The battle for Bakhmut itself began in earnest when the Russians took Solidar. Quickly take you to the live UA map, and we'll just zoom in here on Bakhmut. Now, in red is the Russian territory. You can see here that's Bakhmut, and to the north Krasnogora and Solidar. And many analysts said that when Solidar fell, that the writing was on the wall for Bakhmut. And for me, the battle for Bakhmut, it hasn't taken place in 6 months. It's taken place since the fall of Solidar, which I think was, without checking, I think it was about a couple of months ago. It certainly wasn't 7 months ago. But it's taken some time for the Russians to advance quite slowly towards the environs of Bakhmut. So this idea that British military intelligence also said Russia appeared to be moving to a defensive strategy in eastern Ukraine. This is what passes for journalism in The Guardian. A wire agency reports the propaganda of the British military establishment about what's going on in Ukraine, and they copy and paste it and have it as their lead headline. Are Russia moving towards a defensive strategy in eastern Ukraine? It's probably yes and no. I would say about that. If we go back to the live UA map, you can see that there are Russian storming operations. When you see these little red Kalashnikovs, that's Russians advancing or trying to advance. And you can see, I mean, this is the front line, that there are storming operations from the Russians advancing forwards right the way along what is a very front line, right the way from south to north. That doesn't seem like a defensive posture to me, but one could say that given that it's heavily telegraphed by the Ukrainians they're about to make a big counter-attack, the spring offensive, it's entirely possible, very likely in fact, that the Russians are putting in fortifications in response to that. If one looks at the deployment map, you can see this is Bakhmut, and it's clear that the Ukrainians have a lot of forces in this area, so it would make sense for the Wagners to be defending here, and to the south here, expecting a major attack from the Ukrainians. Hasn't been forthcoming, which I'm a little bit surprised about. It might be to do with the weather. I'm not sure quite what they're waiting for. I would have thought, I mean, it's reported that the Ukrainians have gathered a force of between 60 and 80,000 men in this area. I would have thought sooner the better, because these forces here have this force here, the 3rd Operational Brigade, Spartan National Guard, you've got the 93rd Mechanized Brigade, you've got the 241st Territorial Defence Brigade. They've been there for some time, and this militia. You know, these forces are under intense pressure. I think this map underestimates the scale of the Russian progress. I suspect it's much further east than this map suggests, than any of the maps suggest. And the sooner really that these forces can be released and supported properly from inside this cauldron, the better. So I was curious about why they're waiting. I'm just going to scroll down here a little bit. We'll come back to those stories. So it's interesting that just to, here we go. The Bakhmut direction is the most difficult, and that today, Zaporizhzhia on the Ukrainian side is talking of the situation being stabilized. Things were much more rah-rah from the Ukrainians over the last few days. So this is a change, and it's a change over the last 24 hours. It might not mean anything, it might mean something. Certainly more cautious language of the last few hours than we've seen from them before. But let's just go down these stories in order. That's the headline from The Guardian. So they're saying that Russia is going to move in a little sotto voce aside about something which is, ought to be extremely alarming to everyone, that Russia is elaborating on its agreement with Belarus to move tactical nuclear weapons into Belarus, right next to an active war zone. But nothing going on here, folks. Nothing to see here. I find that alarming. I think you ought to as well. So this is the same story. Moscow has deal with Belarus to station nuclear weapons. Now this is an old chestnut. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So this is at 5:15. The head of the UN's International Atomic Agency will visit Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant next week to assess the serious security situation there, the IAEA said. Rafael Grossi said in a statement that the nuclear safety and security dangers at the Russian-held plant were all too obvious. Now, it's worth saying in this context that the Western media narratives about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant have been some of the most extraordinary of the war. They've essentially implied, when it says here that the nuclear safety and security dangers at the Russian-held plant were all too obvious. Well, they are very obvious because the security dangers that threaten the Russian-held plant do not come from Russia. They come from Ukraine, and they come because Ukraine has repeatedly shelled the plant. Now, the last time that inspectors from the IAEA rocked up at Zaporizhzhia, the Russians took them round the plant and showed them where the Ukrainians had been shelling it. And the Ukrainians put the IAEA under a great deal of pressure to say that this was somehow the fault of the Russians, as if somehow the Russians would be shelling themselves. And the IAEA studiously remained neutral, refused to do so, much to the fury of Kiev. But it's extraordinary that essentially the corporate media have been running the story that the Russians, who have troops and military equipment inside not only the environs of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, but inside the turbine hall. It's reported that they have, military armored vehicles and the like actually inside the plant itself. Would then decide that the way forward was to shell themselves, therefore being somehow partially responsible for the all too obvious security dangers at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. There's only currently one source of security danger to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that comes from Ukraine. Now, in the run-up to the plant being captured by Russia, Russia shelled the plant. So then, the danger, the all-too-obvious danger to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was from the Russians. So I'm not saying that they're angels here, because they ain't. But they are in control of the plant, and there is absolutely no reason for them to be shelling it, and every reason why they wouldn't want to. The way that the corporate media fudge this is to simply report that both the Russians and the Ukrainians blame each other for shelling the plant. Yes, but it's perfectly obvious that one of those claims has any credibility and one does not. It's completely ludicrous to assert that it's even possible that the Russians would somehow be firing missiles and shells at their own at their own installation and their own troops and their own equipment, because that's what you're being sort of gaslit into half accepting. It's quite ludicrous. So that's that. Russia fired on humanitarian aid delivery point. Naturally, according to the Ukrainian military, I'm sure you're beginning to get the way this goes in this Guardian Live blog. If the Ukrainians say something, then the Guardian Live blog just reports it verbatim. This isn't an exercise in seeking the truth of journalists on the ground trying to find things out and reporting them. This isn't an exercise in trying to hold power to account. This is an exercise in saying to power, in this instance, the West proxies, military proxies in Ukraine, what's going on? And then, what have you got for us, power? And power says, well, this is what we've got. This is what we want you to say. And the Guardian saying, oh, okay then. And then saying, quite what we need the Guardian for, in that case, escapes me. But this is what this blog is. It's 90% about. There's some pictures here of a training militia, training in near Lviv. Here's a summary talking about the stabilization. There's here the Turkish president thanks Putin for his positive attitude regards the Black Sea grain deal. Worth saying that the Black Sea grain deal also allows Russia. This isn't generally known because not many people have chosen to focus on the detail, not least The Guardian or any of the Western media. But the Black Sea grain deal also allows Russia to export agricultural fertilizers and oil. It's not just a grain deal. In fact, the grain deal, calling it a grain deal, is a cover-up. It's an export deal. It allows Ukraine to export grain, yes, so you focus on that. That's true. But the real story of the Black Sea grain deal is what it allows Russia to export. Because depriving the world of Russian agricultural fertilizer would be catastrophic to the world's food supply. And that is why this deal was done. It wasn't, because the West cared all that much about Ukraine's grain exports, but they did care a great deal about the export of those fertilizers. And essentially, the deal was not about grain. It was about the Russians saying, well, okay, you can ship out your grain and we'll start sending out our fertilizer again, but you have to bundle, allowing us to sell oil via third parties, and that's exactly what happened. Not many people know that. You heard it here first if you hadn't heard it before. What's the next one from The Guardian? More than 5,000 former criminals have been pardoned after finishing their contracts to fight in Russia's Wagner mercenary group against Ukraine. The founder of Wagner, Yevgeny Prigozhin, said on Saturday. Well, that's okay. Maybe that's true. That was supposed to be the deal, was that these are allegedly convicts in in Russian jails who are offered a simple choice and stay here and serve out your sentence or go to Ukraine. And if on the off chance you survive the experience, we'll let you go. And that seems to be Prigozhin keeping to his word. An interesting story. Be interesting to see whether that's true or not, or whether the numbers are true. I mean, this is a very disturbing story. United Nations has said it is deeply concerned for what it said was summary executions of prisoners of war by both Russian and Ukrainian forces on the battlefield. I recall seeing just some dreadful footage of Russian soldiers burned alive by Ukrainians in the early days of the war north of Kyiv. These allegations from either side are almost impossible to verify at a time of war. If they are going to be verified, they will need to be clarified by an independent investigation that won't be able to take place until after the war is finished, and even then, establishing the facts will prove extremely difficult, I suspect. This story here about summary execution of prisoners by both the Russians and Ukrainians is shocking on two levels. It's shocking because it's happened, deeply shocking. A war crime, a crime against humanity. And it's shocking because this story will be largely buried by the Western media because it displaces the narrative that Ukraine's fighters are all angels and Russian fighters are all orcs, when it's not really quite so straightforward as that. But if we were to start disturbing the narrative, people might start asking other questions about the war in Ukraine, and they don't want that. This is a story. Next one. Russia have placed a former speechwriter for Vladimir Putin on a wanted list. Doesn't say why. He says he's going to become an outspoken political consultant, frequently quoted by Russian and foreign media. It's clearly, if we're to believe this report, he said something to upset the Russians. I think, dare I say, they seem to have become, since the issue of that arrest warrant against Putin by the ICC, even more tetchy about dissent than normal. This story was doing the rounds yesterday. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev saying that a Ukrainian counter-offensive was on the way. Interestingly, that mood music has changed today from the Ukrainians themselves, who've been boosting that idea for weeks, to stabilization. So I wonder if that points to a further degradation of the situation in Bakhmut. I suspect it does. So here is the story about this arrest warrant from the ICC. The Russians are very upset about it and are suggesting that Russia's parliament speaker has suggested banning the activities of the ICC in Russia. It's worth saying that neither Russia nor the United States recognize the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. I don't know how true this is, but certainly I've heard it. I've seen it written in a number of places that the Americans were keen for the ICC to rather soft pedal this arrest warrant for Putin. If you don't know, it was issued not because of any alleged war crimes on the battlefield in Ukraine. It was issued because Putin and one of his aides were accused of deporting Ukrainian children illegally from Russian-held areas of Ukraine back to Russia. I think this story has a lot of holes in it, which I will elaborate on another time. it's worth saying, as I say, that neither the US or Russia recognise the jurisdiction of the ICC. But I think the Americans were quite keen that I've certainly seen it written in a few places, the Americans were quite keen that the ICC soft pedal this pursuit of Putin for this particular war crime, because it inexorably leads, if we go down this route, to more easily provable things that American servicemen did in Afghanistan. Now, the last time that the ICC was muttering about following up on the actions of American servicemen in Afghanistan with relation to war crimes, the US threatened to arrest the judges. The Russians, in their part, threatened to toss the odd missile their way and are threatening to arrest them as well. So I don't know. It strikes me that I don't quite see what the point of the International Criminal Court is, other than a publicity stunt. It's a good media story, but ultimately, what does it even mean? Putin's not going to be arrested. No one on his behalf is going to be arrested by the ICC. No American serviceman is ever going to be put on trial by the ICC for alleged war crimes in Afghanistan. So, what's the point? I don't know what the point is. Perhaps you can write in and tell me what the point is. They're saying here that much activity in Russia and southern stretches of the front in eastern Donbass today, Friday. Quick look at the live UA map will certainly seem to bear that out. Now, everywhere you see a little bomb, a red bomb icon, that's the Russian shelling a particular area. You can see they've been shelling locations, towns, cities all along the front line. Everywhere you see one of these little Kalashnikovs, that is Russian troops either moving forwards into an area or trying to move forwards into an area. So there's certainly a lot of activity today. That's a big pickup, actually, from yesterday. Lots of activity around Avdiivka, which we'll come back to in a minute, and of course Bakhmut, but also further north towards Kupiansk and Liman in this area here. And that's a change. I mean, they've been making steady progress there. The suggestion is that this advance by the Russians is designed to draw forces away from Avdiivka, this cauldron down here near Donetsk city, from Avdiivka, and of course from Bakhmut, and to prevent the Ukrainians from moving reserves that might be deemed not necessary in this area down towards Bakhmut and Avdiivka. That's the way these war operations go. It's a game of chess. New Zealand. So what's next? New Zealand's foreign minister has expressed concern to China over any provision of lethal aid to support Russia. Okay. So this is the story about this change in mood music for the Ukrainians, which may mean nothing. But it was interesting that yesterday it was all, the great counteroffensive coming in today is, well, the Bakhmut situation is difficult and the situation is being stabilised. They weren't really talking like that yesterday. That from General Valery Zaluzhny. Now, there's some pictures here from who the pictures are from a wire agency, Getty. In this case, this is a man receiving humanitarian aid near Zaporizhzhia. This is apparently a passing out graduation of officers from the National Academy in Ukraine. I mean, I've certainly seen it written. This looks all very orderly and menacing. Looks like Ukraine is totally on it. I've certainly seen it written in many places that the training given to ordinary grunts on the front line is, to put it mildly, unsatisfactory and short. And the one Ukrainian military officer said that some of his recruits were frightened of the sound of a gun and didn't know how to throw a hand grenade and had been in Kharkiv for 3 days and then sent to the front line, which does not make a battle-hardened stormtrooper. It does not make. These are civilians being evacuated from this village here, as memory serves. That is north of Avdiivka. So clearly the Ukrainians are rattled. I'm almost certain that village is north of Avdiivka. I'll check it in a minute. That they're concerned about advances in this area. Okay, so the rest of the stories we've covered. I just wanted to pop over quickly to Al Jazeera. So again, this is what's extraordinary about the corporate media. The corporate media, I would include Al Jazeera, although it's Qatari. Al Jazeera, The Guardian, New York Times, the Irish Times, all of the British newspapers, most of the German outlets, most of the French outlets, they all sing from the same half a dozen bullet points every single day in the same way. And so The Guardian says that the battle for the eastern city of Bakhmut is stabilizing, so Al Jazeera says it too. Neither of them know. I mean, all they're doing is parroting what they've been told by the Ukrainians. So I guarantee you this will be the same quote from Zelensky. There it is. The frontline situation is the toughest in the Bakhmut direction, Zelensky said. After this is the same copy and paste job. There's no need to go through all this again. Al Jazeera also leads with this story about the Mississippi tornado and ongoing conflict between pro-Iranian forces in Syria and US fighter jets. Once again, spreading US-style democracy, peace and harmony throughout the world. Quickly bounce onto the New York Times. Yep, battle for Bakhmut and we stabilised, the Ukrainian general said. I suspect that Ukrainian general is Zelensky. And I suspect he says that the situation in the direction of Bakhmut is the most difficult. This is behind the paywall, so I can't access it, but this is an interesting story. US volunteers in Ukraine who lie waste and bicker. People who would not be allowed anywhere near the battlefield in a US-led war, as if this war in Ukraine is not US-led. Well, I suppose what we can paraphrase, I say, people who would not be allowed anywhere near the battlefield in the US Army are active on the Ukrainian front with ready access to American weapons. I wonder why they're running that story. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Conflict in Syria escalates. I'll come back to that. I'm going to stay. This is also New York Times. Also goes through the same tropes. Bakhmut battle could be stabilized. Ukrainian general says. So that's the thing we're supposed to believe today. Yesterday it was Ukrainians prepare for grand counteroffensive. Today it's stabilized. Ukrainians said it was a grand counteroffensive yesterday, and so all the usual outlets said it was a grand counteroffensive. Today, Zelensky said it's stabilization first. So that's what they all say. I'm going to play you this clip. It is from... it's a video on the YouTube channel Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. I hope they don't mind me playing a section of it, or possibly all of it. I'm going to play a bit of it, and I'm going to see what you think. I'm going to have my own thoughts.
Люди, які залучені до цієї роботи, насправді такі самі мобілізовані і кілька місяців тому або кілька днів тому прийшли на службу. Вони ще недостатньо були навчені поведінки, особливостям цієї роботи.
I can't help but thinking that what specific training do you require to know that you're not supposed to be wrestling people to the ground and manhandling them with aggressive force into the back of vans. I would have thought it'd be fairly easy to make that clear. Just me, being naive.
І, зокрема, командувач суворо засудив саму організацію цієї роботи, за що керівники обласного центру комплектування, районних центрів комплектування, які до цього дотичні, були притягнуті до дисциплінарної відповідальності.
Now, does anyone believe for a millisecond that this is anything other than a cover-up? I've read multiple reports going back for weeks that websites had sprung up in Ukraine and then been subsequently taken down by the Ukrainian authorities. Websites that tried to help Ukrainian men who weren't so keen to die for NATO and for Ursula von der Leyen and all the rest, from being essentially bundled into cars and vans, exactly like that, where the website said, "Don't go here," because they're active, and they were updated on a live basis, and the Ukrainians quickly took them down. I mean, what does this tell us? What does this tell us? When play you a bit more. Let's get. I think two things about this. I mean, possibly three things. I think the first thing is that I think it demonstrates a certain desperation, I think, from the Ukrainians, and I think it's indicative of the losses that they suffered that they're now responding in this way. I don't believe for a millisecond that these are isolated incidents and that somehow the disciplinary action is now underway against the officers responsible, or that those the higher ups didn't know that this was going on. Of course, they knew it was going on. I don't believe for a millisecond that the soldiers who are responsible for the things you've just seen in the video didn't know that what they were doing, didn't know somehow that they weren't supposed to be bundling people into the back of vans. I think that stretches credulity too far for this homeboy. I mean, so I don't think this is an isolated incident. I just going back to the map of the battlefield in Ukraine. As an overall comment, I say this. I think that we are close to a decisive phase in this war. I think that, all I want as a pacifist is for this war to end. I mean, that's what I want. I see no immediate end to this war, but I see a pivotal phase coming now. I think this may well be one of the last rolls of the dice for Ukraine, and I think that video right there of forced conscription in the most violent ways you could imagine is indicative of a manpower shortage for Ukraine. Now, they have gathered a lot of forces in one place here, and they're going all in on Bakhmut. What's going to happen? I don't know. If you force me to put my money on it, I would say that the Ukrainians will make some progress. I think that progress will peter out, and I think that the coming offensive will cost a lot of lives. I think it will extend the course of the war by a number of months, maybe 6 months. But ultimately, the outcome for me of this war has been foreordained from the beginning by the simple fact that in a war of attrition, Russia is a bigger country, and it has immediate access to its equipment and logistics in a way that Ukraine, which is relying on the West for weapons and logistics, does not. I've said from the very beginning, Sodium Hayes has said from the very beginning, this is not a war that Ukraine could win. I think they're surprised a great many people by the scale and ferocity of their resistance, whatever you feel about that. But ultimately, I don't think it's going to change the outcome. What the end goal will be, again, it would be pure speculation for me, but I think in the end, give it 6 months, I think we will get to a situation where this will be resolved at the negotiating table, and I think on terms much less favourable to Ukraine than had they gone to negotiate in March of last year, when I think a altogether different kind of deal was on the table. And I think that the Ukrainians will have to accept some form of wording that Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk and Luhansk are gone and will never be returned to Ukraine, as unpalatable as that sounds to many people. I think that's the way this will end. We shall see. We shall see. But I think the idea that the Ukrainians have the manpower and the equipment to drive the Russians out of these territories and then retake Crimea is somewhat fanciful. Okay, well, just to quickly have a look at this last update. Then we'll call that a wrap for today's update here on the 25th of March of Sodium Haze. Russian oil company Gazprom reduces gas export to EU through Ukraine by 15%, the Kiev Independent reports. It seems extraordinary, doesn't it, that we still have, millions of cubic meters of gas going from Russia through Ukraine to the west, and that those volumes, are being paid for and are therefore fueling, the Russian assault. I mean, it just scrambles the brain, I'll look into that story a little bit more. It's an interesting one. Okay, that's all for now from Sodium Haze. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Bye bye.